back. And again, welcome to Sam Faddis, who is shedding light on both Hunter Biden's laptop, what we are learning about it, and I think we may learn considerably more shortly, but also what it tells us about what we must do in response to what we've learned. And Sam, I just wanted to set up that conversation with you by talking about a specific deliverable that I believe was a direct byproduct of either what Joe Biden had already garnered from the Chinese Communist Party or what was on offer if he simply was able to secure what came to be called a memorandum of understanding between the United States government and that of China, governing the access Chinese companies could have to our capital markets. And the way this came about back in May of 2013 was, as you know, the Chinese were given preferential access to our capital markets. Their companies didn't have to meet our standards, our statutory requirements, our regulatory requirements for accountability, for transparency, for governance. All those things that American companies have to meet to protect investors were over the side as a result of this memorandum of understanding. By some estimates, between $1 trillion and maybe $7 trillion has been, as a result of this memorandum of understanding, migrated from American investors' holdings here to those Chinese companies, some of whom, well, all of them work for the Chinese Communist Party, but some of them work directly for the People's Liberation Army as well. So, if you would, look at this as a case study, Sam, of something, if you were running Joe Biden as a Chinese communist counterpart to the role that you used to play, how big a deal would this be if your agent of influence actually performed that feat?
Wow, I would probably get a significant cash award for that from my boss.
I would imagine.
Look, somebody somewhere in the Chinese intelligence apparatus has probably garnered all sorts of promotions and awards over this operation. Uh, I mean, this is what we're talking about here, Frank, and I think this is at the heart of everything we're discussing. Is this is damage being done to us that is catastrophic. This is an existential threat. We're not talking about a guy leaking some secrets at some level that, yeah, it's going to damage our security, but eventually we'll catch this guy and patch the hole and shut down some ops and move on. You're talking about things that fundamentally alter the balance of power on the planet. Now, at the heart of that has to be the money you are talking about here. You're talking about lifeblood and fuel for our number one strategic adversary. I'll just use the word enemy on the planet. A nation dedicated to replacing us as the dominant power on the planet. And you don't have to guess at that because they say it all the time and they write it all the time and they discuss it all the time. You can't miss it if you've got ears, right? This is their goal. And you're going to pump just ungodly sums of money into these guys. Could there be anything more important from a strategic level to them? No, there could not. And you're absolutely right.
Well, let me respond to that question, Sam, because arguably that is in a class by
Yes.
itself in terms of compromise. But unfortunately, now, in the period since Joe Biden became president of the United States and has engaged in what I think of as a wrecking operation across the board, domestic policies, foreign policies, all of which have, as we've discussed before, in common one thing: they all have benefited the Chinese Communist Party. They've been bad for us, yes, and bad for others involved to some extent, but all of them seem to have been to the benefit of the CCP. Which brings me back to the question that you sort of begged earlier, and that is, you said something to the effect that our counterintelligence operations should be all over this, ferreting out the extent of the damage and bringing, presumably, charges forward to prosecute those responsible. Is that being done, Sam? Is there any indication that our intelligence community is alive to this danger, let alone that the Justice Department is actually bringing, as part of what used to be called their China initiative, perhaps now wrapped up, another tell, prosecution of the President of the United States and his family?
There is zero indication. In fact, every indication is that absolutely nothing's being done. I I am if there is the FBI received a copy of Hunter's laptop way back when, right? In fact, they actually received the original laptop. It was a copy that was retained by the guy who was repairing the laptop that has since been cloned and multiplied. The original laptop was turned over to the FBI. I've been pretty close to this story from the beginning. I cannot document that the FBI even ever actually formally entered that into evidence or documented that they held it. But certainly everything we know says doesn't suggest that the FBI has never done anything to investigate anything on that laptop. Okay, not the potential child pornography, drug use, SEC violation. There's a whole raft of criminal charges here that have nothing to do with what we're really talking about. And they certainly haven't come within 10 miles of doing anything to investigate the possibility that the guy now sitting in the Oval Office works for a hostile foreign
Yeah.
power.
This is scandalous, as well as a grave national security peril, as you said. At End Magazine, you recently wrote that this requires a special
Yes.
prosecutor. You've had some experience with all of this, of course, out in Washington State as an assistant attorney general. You've, obviously watched closely other special prosecutors. Most of us think that, this is just a formula for endless investigations and witch hunts and so on. But in this case, how else are we going to get to the bottom of what's happened here and the extent of the damage associated with it?
I don't see another way that we are. Look, we cannot have this mountain of information sitting here. As I said, you ought to be hearing just nothing but alarm bells and sirens in the background and seeing red flashing lights. Good Lord, a threat to the Republic on a scale that really we've never experienced in our history, and just pretend like it doesn't exist. We have to get to the bottom of that. We have to empower somebody to dig into it and tell us what is going on. And particularly in light of you talked about this example of the issue with finances and access to our capital markets and so forth. But there's an endless list of things just really in the last 14 months that Joe Biden has done that are doing catastrophic damage to our national security every day. We got Chinese troops on Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan training Haqqani network operatives, obviously not for actions in Afghanistan, for attacks abroad, all because of Joe, right? I mean, we could go down this list. We got Iranians who are have an alliance with China, firing ballistic missiles at our consulate in Erbil in northern Iraq, and we're ignoring that. Ballistic missiles fired from Iranian territory on our diplomatic compound. We act like it doesn't happen. We could do this all day, right? This guy is destroying our national security by the moment. Yeah, we got to dig into this.
We've got to get it to the bottom of it. You're absolutely right. Sam Faddis, thank you for raising this alarm. Thank you for the clarity that you bring to it from your own life experience as well as your common sense. Thanks for all you do at andmagazine.com these days. I hope people will go there and come back to us again very soon if you would. Speaking of the military threats to our country, we're going to talk with a distinguished retired lieutenant general of the United States Air Force, Rod Bishop.